Welcome back to WCB Jazz Vinyl. As of the date of this recording, we're just over a week away from Record Store Day, and I wanted to talk to you today about one of the titles being released that I was most excited about. This is Kenny Dorham's Blue Bossa in the Bronx, live from the Blue Morocco. This is being put out by Resonance Records. It's one of actually two records that were recorded at this venue that are being released on Record Store Day. So that's what we're about to get into. Of course, as always, go ahead and hit like and subscribe if you'd like to. And you can always follow me on Instagram as well. I post there pretty much every day. My handle is what_can_brown. All right, so this is what this release looks like. It is a gatefold jacket. I mentioned it's a double LP. Comes with a booklet, 180 gram on the vinyl. The content is transferred from the original master tapes. It is mastered by Matthew Luthans at the Mastering Lab, and it was pressed at La Vinylist. I think some of these things are sort of hallmarks of Resonance Records, right? Whether we're talking about Record Store Day releases or we're talking about some of the stuff that they put out throughout the course of the year. I think that people familiar with their titles know that there's sort of a layer of quality that, yes, they do focus on some archival releases and content that if it hasn't been heard before, when it's been heard, perhaps it's, like bootleg, like they don't involve the estate, or maybe the sound quality isn't quite up to snuff. And so when Resonance comes in and sort of works their magic over some of these releases, you know that what you're going to get is really the best that the music can possibly sound, right? They do, some cleanup when necessarily. And again, I think they do a pretty good job too of choosing the right content rather than just releasing an archival release for the sake of releasing an archival release, but not actually also having it sound good. So all that aside, this is recorded from a live performance in 1967 at a club called the Blue Morocco Club, located in the Bronx. And I am going to get into some of the history of that in just a second. As far as the lineup here, so Kenny Dorham, 1967. Like, if you're thinking, oh, that's late for Kenny Dorham, you'd be right, and I'm going to talk about that as well. So the lineup here, we have Sonny Red, we have Cedar Walton, Paul Chambers, Dennis Charles, and Kenny Dorham. And incidentally, across these two discs, there's just over an hour of music. A bunch of the tracks here are actually kind of long format in that kind of like 10 to 14 minute sort of range. And then there's a couple of shorter ones as well. But overall, you got an hour of music here. So pretty substantial. All right. So the Blue Morocco is kind of a fascinating place. And I wanted to address this before we talk about the music. Some of this material or some of this history that I'm about to review is actually included in the booklet. And then some of the rest of it I kind of went like, did some of my own research, which I sometimes like to do. So the Blue Morocco, sometimes called Sylvia's Blue Morocco, because it was opened in 1956 by the singer Sylvia Vanderpool, later Sylvia Robinson. And she opened it along with her husband, Joe Robinson. Supposedly, Sylvia opened the club with proceeds from her hit song Love is Strange, which I believe it because that was a pretty big hit. And by the way, if it doesn't sound familiar, look up Love is Strange by Mickey and Sylvia, and I'm sure that you'll recognize it. It was featured prominently in the movie Dirty Dancing. It was in Martin Scorsese's Casino. It was featured in Terrence Malick's Badlands and like some other movies. So she not only had this club, the Blue Morocco, she also owned Sugar Hill Records, which later produced the Sugar Hill Gang and was responsible for producing, I think, what is commonly thought of as one of the first, if not the first, rap record, which was Rapper's Delight. So Sugar Hill Records also signed Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five and recorded the single "The Message." So anyway, they have a lot of cred, but I think early on, sort of how it started is Sylvia's hit song that then sort of launched, the Blue Morocco. So that club, I think from an early stage, was known for featuring Latin-inspired music, initially jazz, and then later funk. So some of the bands that performed there were Pucho and the Latin Soul Brothers, as well as Joe Panama and later Jimmy Castor. Unfortunately, the club doesn't exist anymore. I think it closed sometime in the 1970s, but I don't know exactly when. And actually, I looked it up. So the building has since been demolished, and there's just a construction fence up that actually looks like it's been there for quite a while. All right, so that's the club. What about Kenny Dorham? So this was 1967. His most recent album as a leader was Trompetta Toccata for Blue Note, and that was in September of 1964. So if you're doing the math with me, it had been 3 years since he had recorded an album as a leader. His most recent recorded studio session, just across the board, whether he was a leader or not, was in 1967 with Cedar Walton, who's also on this record, and that was for the Prestige album titled Cedar! Exclamation point. He so Dorham actually didn't really record much after that session. In fact, there's only 5 entries on the Jazz Disco website for studio recordings that he participated in after that. And he died in 1972 at the age of 48. So this release is from a time where we just don't really have that much in the way of recordings from Kenny Dorham. Really, between 1964 and 1972, there just isn't much, barely more than a handful. And incidentally, if I think about some of the other artists who are here, you have Sonny Red, who also died at the age of 48. And I guess maybe while we're at it, Paul Chambers died at the age of 33, just 2 years after this recording. So, you know, in a way, part of the interest here with this recording is being able to hear some music from Kenny Dorham as well as some of his sidemen at a time where it was towards the end of their careers, and several of their lives were cut short. And so I think it is an interesting time period. It's an interesting time period to hear material and what Kenny Dorham sounded like at a time when we don't really have a lot of other points of reference. All right, so the music, and I wanted to give you the lay of the land in terms of the stereo format here as well. So what you have is you have Sonny Red in the left channel along with Cedar Walton, so alto piano in the left. You have Dorham and drums in the right channel, and bass to me sounds pretty center. It could be a little bit like left of center, but fairly center. And what strikes me immediately when I first put this on is that it was just really well recorded. And I don't want to make it seem like I was surprised, but sometimes with live recordings that are put out by any label in particular, you have to kind of make excuses, and you say, oh well, there's obstruction because of the audience noise, or the room has a sound to it, or the mic placement wasn't great. And on this recording, I would just say that all the instruments are very much not only audible but well balanced as well. And it didn't seem to me that there was really any degradation of sound. So it isn't thin, it isn't obscured again by like room noise or audience noise. And I think part of what worked here is that each of the instruments or each of the musicians played into the microphone for their solos. So it doesn't come across as a sloppy kind of recording or performance. Feels like it was executed well. Cedar Walton's piano, and let's be real, like piano can be hard to record properly live, I think. Sounds really excellent. It's like not out of tune. You'd be surprised maybe at how audible is, not only when he's obviously soloing, but when he's comping behind some of the other soloists. And just generally, I think all the musicians sound great. Really nice to hear, especially the horns. I think I just tend to gravitate more towards the horns and pay more attention to that, but they sound great, especially on the opener Blue Bossa. Just really great solos, and that happens to be a track actually where everybody, I think, besides Dennis Charles, solos. And what you can hear just immediately on that opening track is how crisp everybody is. So as I mentioned, the album does start out with Blue Bossa. This was a track that Kenny Dorham wrote and first appeared, I believe, on Joe Henderson's Page One for Blue Note. This version here is 13 plus minutes, and it's the only track on side A. So, as I mentioned, Dorham, Red, Walton, and Chambers each take an extended solo. All sound excellent, all sound energetic. As far as some of the other tunes, you have Confirmation, which is a Charlie Parker tune, I believe. And this one, I'll say this one, I think because there's so much feel that goes into how you actually play the melody line, because it's pretty quick, which is pretty common with some of those Parker tunes. The doubling of melody by Red and Dorham is maybe just a little bit looser or sloppy in general, but again, it's just kind of it fits the I think it fits the vibe of the piece anyway. And that's another long format one at 14 plus minutes. Otherwise, the group here plays a number of tunes that you probably heard of. So you got Bags Groove, Blue Friday, which is a Dorham original. There's the Miles Davis song, The Theme, and then there's a few standards that I think are going to come, are probably going to be familiar as well. And this is, not uncommon to play a live performance and want to be able to play things that people have heard, whether your own stuff or whether standards. So overall, I would say there's 4 tracks that I'd call long format or at more than 10 minutes apiece. There's an 8-minute track, and then there's a couple of 4-minute tracks. I think it feels like a nice mix of original material by Dorham as well as maybe more recognizable tunes. So as far as record store day titles, this was at or near the top of my list, along with a few others. Like the Pharoah Sanders Mac Ave release, Freddie Hubbard release, as well as the Mingus titles that Resonance is putting out, and then certainly a few others. I think the question always with Record Store Day is do we need this? Is it redundant? And in my opinion, this is definitely not redundant. I mentioned some of this up front, but this recording is from a period of time where Dorham didn't really produce a lot of recorded music. It is kind of an all-star lineup as well, featuring a number of musicians that I mentioned some of them left us too soon. And I think it's just clear in this recording that they sort of fed off each other. They got a lot of energy from each other, and they seem very comfortable playing with each other. And that's important. I think that's the sort of, X factor that can separate a great recording from just a good recording. And I think, like I said as well, this is also just recorded well for a live session. There's so many that maybe weren't as great, but this is kind of the thing that not only I want to hear, but we'll get repeated spins. In fact, I got this in about 2 weeks ago, thanks to the folks at Resonance for thinking of me and sending me a copy ahead of time. And I've listened to it probably 4 or 5 times all the way through. So I don't know. To me, this is a great mix of like right musicians, right time period in terms of like in history and towards the end of some of these folks' careers. So the ability to capture them then, the right recording quality. And I think all of this sort of makes it a great release for Record Store Day. So, I'm as with the Mingus one that I did a video on about a week ago, this is another recommendation. I obviously it's fortunate for me to be able to get a couple of these ahead of time so that I don't have to worry just so much about trying to find them during what is oftentimes a hectic experience on Record Store Day. But one thing that I will say is that Resonance, more than some of the other labels, tend to put out their titles with enough quantities out there in order to make it so that these aren't the ones necessarily that you're going to see flipped on eBay. I know that that's happened sometimes, especially with like some of the Bill Evans stuff, but that's usually by Elemental who puts those out. Thing with Resonance is that they're a nonprofit, and it feels clear to me that their goal is more to put out music that should be heard and needs to be heard, kind of thing, and that maybe hasn't been in the past. And it's a little bit less on like that, kind of the profit component, because they're a nonprofit. And so anyway, it feels to me that they make a concerted effort to release these in quantities so that people that want to hear them can get them. And incidentally, if you're not an LP person or simply you don't want to spend as much money on Record Store Day, this is going to be released in I think it's a double CD. It's a double CD that they're putting out. So check Resonance Records website. That's going to go on sale. I think it's typically like a week or so, maybe 2 weeks after Record Store Day. So it will be available in another format. So that's kind of it. I hope this has been helpful for anybody who's, again, thinking about how to prioritize their spend coming up in a little over a week. Let me know what you think, I guess, maybe when you get this in, or if you get a chance to preview some of the tracks that are available online. Let me know what you think about them in the comments. And yeah, that's it. Thanks, everyone. I'll see you next time.